welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fundamental, something that's woven so deeply into, well, reality that it could genuinely reshape how you think about getting things done, about success. We're going beyond the familiar stuff today. We're delving into Richard Koch's Beyond the 80/20 Principle. Now, you probably know his classic book, The 80/20 Principle, super famous, big in business, productivity circles. But if that was the appetizer, well, Beyond the 80/20 is the main course. It promises a much deeper look at how things really work. Have you ever stopped and wondered why sometimes just a tiny bit of effort gives you these massive results, like completely out of proportion? Or maybe how some successes seem to follow these, I don't know, hidden patterns that defy simple logic? That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Our mission really is to pull out the key insights from this material, to help you grasp how you might actually do less and achieve more, but properly achieve more by working smarter, understanding the underlying forces.
It's true. Koch's first book on the 80/20 principle, the Pareto principle, it was huge. And rightly so. It really hammered home that effort and results. They're almost never evenly spread. It shifted focus from just, volume of work to strategic impact. But with this sequel, Beyond the 80/20 principle, Koch takes us much deeper. He's not just observing that things are uneven. He's trying to dissect why success isn't just random chance. He argues it follows these specific universal patterns. He calls them power laws. And he says they're based on fundamental laws you see in nature, in economics, even network behavior. So this deep dive hopefully will shed light on how you can spot these crucial leverage points yourself. Find where that tiny input can create a massive output. And just as importantly, where most of your effort might actually be going nowhere fast.
Setting the stage, moving beyond the familiar 80/20 rule.
Okay, so let's just quickly touch on that classic 80/20 idea again. Most people have bumped into it. Right? It feels pretty intuitive now. Like you wear 20% of your clothes 80% of the time, or a business gets 80% of its revenue from 20% of its customers. It's a simple, powerful shortcut. Became a real cornerstone of efficiency thinking. Focus on the vital few, forget the trivial many. Poo and knees. Helps us see that not everything matters equally. A very practical tool.
Absolutely. And while that 80/20 rule is powerful and it applies all over the place, what Koch is arguing here is that it's really just a symptom, or maybe one specific example of a much deeper truth. It's the starting point. A signal that the relationship between what you put in and what you get out is almost never linear, never evenly spread. It hints at these deeper, more extreme patterns, suggests the world runs on principles where actually skewed outcomes are the norm, not the exception. Think of 80/20 like noticing a tree's branches aren't all the same size. That's the observation. Beyond the 80/20 principle is like trying to understand the biology, the physics, the fundamental laws that make the tree grow that way, disproportionately, but effectively. It's about getting at the underlying architecture, the thing that produces these skewed results in the first place.
That's a great way to put it. If 80/20 is just the tip of the iceberg, what's the core message Koch is trying to get across in Beyond the 80/20 principle? Because it really is presented as this more powerful sequel, promising deeper secrets. And the claim is bold. It explores these universal power laws governing wealth, success, innovation, growth, everything. So this isn't just about tweaking your business plan or finding a new productivity hack. It sounds like it's about understanding and maybe even harnessing these fundamental forces shaping our world. From the tiny interactions right up to the biggest systems. The sheer scope of it suggests a pretty big shift in perspective. Like there's a deeper operating system to the universe, and if you get it, you can tap into it for some really extraordinary nonlinear results.
And what makes this book so ambitious and frankly so interesting is the way Koch pulls from everywhere. It's radically interdisciplinary. He doesn't just stay in the usual lanes of management theory or economics, which are broad enough fields on their own. No, he dives into physics, biology, economics. He even brings in ideas related to quantum science, which is pretty out there for a business book. So yeah, it's not just a business book in the traditional sense. It's trying to be a book about how the world fundamentally works, showing how these power laws pop up again and again in totally different areas. He pulls threads from chaos theory, fractal geometry, network theory, all to show that success isn't really about isolated wins, it's about systemic advantages. So the core goal, despite all the theory, ends up being quite practical, teaching us how to spot leverage points. Those critical spots, those specific actions or inputs where just a small, focused nudge, like tapping the first domino just right, can set off this huge cascade of impact way beyond what you'd expect if you just thought linearly, effort in equals reward out. It's about finding those pressure points, those force multipliers in whatever system you're trying to influence.
Unpacking the universal power laws.
Okay, right. So if 80/20 is just the starting point, what exactly is this power law thing? And how does it take us into like even more extreme territory? Because 80/20 feels kind of manageable, something we can wrap our heads around. But power law sounds bigger, more fundamental. Can you paint a clearer picture? How does it really differ from 80/20 in a way that clicks immediately?
Yeah, it's a really important distinction. 80/20 is, like you said, a specific observation, a useful rule of thumb about skewed distribution. A power law describes a specific type of statistical relationship that often leads to way more extreme concentrations. Think of it like this. 80/20 says a small effort can give you a lot. Okay? A power law takes that idea and pushes it to the absolute limit. Imagine 1% of people holding 99% of the wealth. Or maybe 1% of books generating 99% of all book sales revenue in a certain category.
Yeah.
It's almost hard to imagine that level of concentration, that kind of extreme, wildly skewed distribution that's the signature of a power law. It's not just uneven, it's radically fundamentally weighted towards a tiny fraction. Technically speaking, it's a relationship where a relative change in one thing leads to a proportional relative change in another, no matter the starting size. What this often means in practice is that the underlying mechanism tends to favor whatever's already successful. It's that rich get richer dynamic baked into the system.
Wow. Okay. So it's like the difference between saying maybe 20% of your friends are the ones you have 80% of your deep conversations with, which feels relatable, right?
Yeah.
Versus saying 1% of the world's population holds 99% of the wealth. That's a completely different scale of imbalance, much more dramatic.
Yeah.
Or like cities. You've got a few tens of millions of people, right? And then just countless small towns and villages. The distribution isn't smooth. It's not a bell curve with most things in the middle. It's massively skewed to those few giants. That really makes the power law idea feel tangible. It's about that huge difference where a tiny number of things really do command almost all the stuff, wealth, impact, attention, whatever it is, leaving very little spread across the rest.
Exactly. And this extreme skew isn't just some mathematical oddity. Koch's argument is that it's fundamental. It's woven into how things work, showing up everywhere, which reinforces this universal aspect. Look at biology, for instance, natural selection, ecosystems, practically textbook examples of power laws. Think about species distribution. Often, a few dominant species just hog most of the resources, kind of dictating the whole ecosystem's balance. Meanwhile, countless other species are just hanging on in small niches. Or think about evolution itself. A few key genetic mutations can have these enormous, disproportionate impacts, leading to whole new branches of life. While most mutations, they do nothing, or they're actually harmful. Success in nature isn't about everyone contributing equally. It's about extreme leverage from specific, super effective adaptations or environmental conditions that just get amplified over generations. Then you look at physics, same patterns. Things like earthquake magnitudes. You get thousands of tiny tremors you barely feel, right? But a few massive earthquakes, though really rare, account for most of the seismic energy released globally each year. Or the size of forest fires. Often follows a power law. A few huge catastrophic fires do the vast majority of the damage, while countless small ones get put out quickly. Even things like the distribution of craters on the moon or stars and galaxies, they often follow these power law patterns. Small events are common, big impactful events are rare, but dominate the total effect. It sort of suggests this self-organizing criticality in complex systems, where small, local stuff can suddenly trigger system-wide, nonlinear effects. Moving to economics, this is probably where we see power laws most clearly in human systems, wouldn't you say? Wealth distribution is the classic stark example. A tiny fraction of people hold the vast majority of global wealth. The Gini coefficient shows this consistently. Same in industries. Market share, product success, it often concentrates heavily. A few big players grab the lion's share of the value, while thousands of smaller companies just struggle for scraps. Think about big tech. A handful of giants just dominate their sectors, capturing disproportionate value compared to all the smaller startups combined. And it's not just old-school competition. It's network effects, economies of scale, first-mover advantages, things that compound super fast, creating the success flywheel. The source even mentions quantum science briefly. Now, that's more abstract, maybe more philosophical here than strictly empirical in this context. But it hints that even at the most fundamental level of reality, complex, nonlinear interactions can lead to these skewed outcomes. Where a tiny change here can cascade into huge effects there, it points to this unpredictable yet patterned nature of how things emerge across all scales. Ultimately, Koch loops all this back to business systems. He's showing how recognizing these fundamental universal patterns in your own business context is absolutely vital for strategic advantage. It means you stop trying to swim against the current, and instead you learn to flow with the natural ways value gets created and concentrated in our interconnected world.
Expert. When you lay it out like that, biology, physics, economics, even quantum science, it's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? It really does suggest a universal operating system. What do you think is the biggest shift in thinking someone should take away from understanding that? Because seeing these patterns pop up in such different fields, it has to change your perspective on success, right? It makes you realize the world isn't some neat, balanced spreadsheet. It's dynamic, and certain things just by their nature carry way more weight than others. It's that aha moment that shifts your focus from just doing more stuff to doing the stuff that really matters, which is almost always a tiny fraction of everything you could be doing.
Key learnings. The pillars of smarter success.
Exactly. And that realization that the world is inherently skewed brings us right to Koch's first big takeaway, the huge disparity between effort and results. We started with 80-20, but the book really hammers this home. Not all effort is equal. It might be 80-20, sure, but often Koch says it's way more extreme, 955 or even 991. And that's not just a small tweak. The implication is profound. It totally challenges our usual thinking. We're often told, work harder, put in the hours, be diligent, treat all tasks with equal care. But hang on, if 99% of your value comes from just 1% of what you do, then that whole work harder approach, it often misses the point entirely. It suggests that most of what we do, most of our effort is basically, well, not very productive, or at least produces very little real impact. So the real game changes. It becomes about identifying and focusing, maybe ruthlessly, on that tiny percentage of effort that gives you exponential returns. And, just as crucial, deliberately letting go of the rest. It's a massive shift from trying to maximize effort to trying to maximize leverage, from being busy to being truly impactful.
Yeah, that really forces you to question that whole idea of busy work versus impactful work. So many of us equate being busy with being productive. We fill our calendars, tick off endless to-do lists. We think hours equal output. But if 99% of the value comes from 1% of the actions, then a massive chunk of our busyness is actually low impact. Maybe even no impact activity. It pushes you towards this almost radical kind of prioritization and ruthlessly cutting out the low impact 80% or 95% or whatever it is. It makes you ask about every single task. Is this part of the vital 1%? Or is it in the peripheral 99%? Like if you're creating content, maybe 99% of your views come from 1% of your videos or 1% of the topics you cover. If you're in sales, maybe 99% of your commission comes from interacting with 1% of your potential clients. If you could actually pinpoint that 1% of your actions delivering 99% of your result, how would that change your day? Your whole approach. It would demand a complete rethink of how you spend your time and energy, pushing you towards being super selective, super strategic. It sounds almost scary, but also kind of freeing, right?
Totally freeing. And that naturally leads to the second key learning, the art of actually finding these power laws. How do you become a power law spotter in your own world? It's not enough just to know they exist theoretically. You need the skill to identify them in your specific situation. The source really emphasizes the practical side here. Whether you're growing a business, building an audience, or investing money, identifying natural advantages is the key to outsized returns. Now, what does he mean by natural advantages? It's not just about being good at something obvious. Koch tells stories like, a small software company finding this incredibly specific, overlooked problem. Say, managing inventory for independent artisanal cheesemakers. Weirdly specific, right? But by nailing that one underserved niche with the perfect solution, they got almost monopoly-like returns. Not by fighting the big guys, but by finding this uncontested spot where their unique thing created huge value for a desperate specific market. Or maybe on a personal level, your natural advantage isn't, say, your coding skill. Maybe it's your unique knack for explaining complex tech stuff in simple, engaging ways to clients who aren't techie. That seemingly soft skill, if you leverage it, if you make it central to what you offer, could create massive, disproportionate value. These advantages are often inherent strengths, unique market positions, or these underserved niches that, once you spot them and really lean into them, give you huge rewards without needing constant, heroic effort. They often exist already, but we overlook them because they don't look like linear, straightforward opportunities. Spotting them takes a different kind of seeing. Analyzing where the hidden leverage is, not just competing on sheer effort or resources. It's about using what you have, or what's easily available, to get results that seem almost outsized compared to the input.
Okay, so what's the takeaway for us listening? It means becoming a kind of strategic detective, doesn't it? You constantly have to ask, where are the hidden advantages I might be missing right now? Where could I apply just a small, smart push for a massive gain? instead of just grinding away at everything. It encourages you to really look hard at what you're doing. Find those non-obvious areas where you're maybe already getting big returns or where you could cultivate them. This isn't about working harder hours. It's about working smarter by finding where your unique strengths meet those outsized opportunities. It might mean strategically dropping entire projects or product lines that, yeah, they make money, but they suck up huge resources for very little actual leverage or growth potential. Or even rethinking relationships, client relationships, maybe that take way more effort than the impact they deliver. It forces a really uncomfortable but necessary reevaluation of what productive actually means.
And the third key learning is really interesting, especially how it connects back to that interdisciplinary approach. Build resilience by creating evolutionary systems. Koch argues, like nature, success is often about creating systems that evolve, replicate, and improve on their own. Oh, this is a big step away from static business plans or rigid personal goals that you constantly have to manually adjust. So what does an evolutionary system look like? It's not a fixed procedure that needs constant handholding. It's more like a dynamic framework. It has feedback loops built in. It's adaptable. It can self-correct. This allows the system to learn from its environment, to grow, to get better over time without you having to manually intervene all the time. Think about a customer service chatbot, not just one that answers basic FAQs, but one that actually learns from the questions people ask. It refines its own answers, maybe even suggests new help articles are needed, all automatically. Or consider a business model like, say, an online marketplace. Its value grows naturally with every new buyer or seller. The system itself gets stronger, more attractive, like a thriving ecosystem. It feeds itself. Another example. Maybe a personalized learning app that adjusts the curriculum based on how a student is doing, optimizing their learning path automatically. Even for personal habits, an evolutionary system could be like setting up a learning loop. You try different study methods, track how well they work for you, and automatically adjust your approach based on what gives you the most learning leverage, instead of just sticking rigidly to one method forever. It's about building the self-amplifying cycle of growth, something that sprouts, adapts, flourishes without you constantly having to water it manually. Setting up a self-sustaining engine, not just pushing a heavy rock uphill forever.
Right. And the long-term power of that is just huge. If you build something that compounds, that creates exponential value as it learns and adapts, you're not limited by your own personal bandwidth each day. It's like a successful species adapting to its environment, or a popular app gaining network effects and getting better with every user. It's about creating leverage that builds on itself. Each bit of growth or learning fuels the next bit, generating value far beyond just adding up the parts. It really shifts your focus from just managing tasks day to day to designing environments, designing systems that encourage this self-sustaining growth. That's a powerful concept for anyone trying to create lasting impact that goes beyond their own direct minute-by-minute efforts, turning static work into these dynamic, self-improving engines.
And the fourth key learning ties into that interconnectedness, the force multiplier effect of working together. Cooperate to multiply. Koch really stresses how collaboration, not just competition, can unlock exponential value. This feels like a really critical point, especially moving beyond the usual individualistic, competitive focus we often see, particularly in Western business thinking. He suggests that by strategically joining forces, forming synergistic partnerships, really leveraging network effects, building strategic alliances, you can create value that's way bigger than what any individual part could do alone. It's not just about dividing up the existing pie more nicely, it's about baking a much, much bigger pie together. When you bring different strengths, different resources, different audiences together in the right way, they don't just add up, they multiply. This creates this powerful multiplier effect, leading to nonlinear growth, outsized returns for everyone involved. It acknowledges that in today's hyper-connected world, real, sustainable value often isn't created in a vacuum. It emerges from these dynamic, collaborative systems.
That raises a really interesting question, though, especially when we're so often focused on individual achievement, beating the competition. How does cooperation create exponential value, not just added value? It's because, I guess, cooperation unlocks possibilities that just didn't exist before, right? Think about platforms connecting different groups like app stores or social media. Their value grows exponentially with each new user or creator because they enable connections and interactions that simply wouldn't happen otherwise. Or think about strategic partnerships where companies combine unique tech or market access. Maybe a big pharma company teams up with a small biotech startup. Their combined research power and market reach create something totally new, something neither could have done alone. The result has far greater potential than either had separately. Sharing resources, knowledge, audiences, it can lead to these huge returns for everyone involved. It can actually change a competitive landscape into more of a collaborative ecosystem where the whole pie gets dramatically bigger, not just sliced differently. It's a powerful nudge to look for synergies, not just rivals. To understand that sometimes the biggest leverage comes from connecting, not just competing head-to-head.
Who should embrace this framework? Audience and application.
Okay, so we've unpacked these universal power laws, these key learnings from beyond the 80-20 principle. Who is this really for? Who should be picking up this book or really thinking about these ideas? Koch seems to target a pretty specific group: entrepreneurs, systems thinkers, startup founders, content creators. Basically, anyone trying to scale up intelligently, not just by brute force, not just working harder. And it makes sense why these groups are a good fit, doesn't it? They're constantly dealing with scaling problems, information overload, the pressure to innovate, but with limited resources. An entrepreneur has to figure out how to grow something from basically nothing without infinite cash or people. A systems thinker is already wired to see connections and leverage points. Startup founders are chasing that hockey stick growth curve that's exactly the kind of nonlinear result power laws describe. And content creators, always looking for ways to reach exponentially more people without having to exponentially increase their output. For all these folks, the standard advice, just work harder, it runs out of steam pretty quickly. They need a framework that explains how to get disproportionate results, how to find those hidden accelerators, how to build self-sustaining growth.
Exactly. For those kinds of people, the book offers what the review called a brilliant next-level framework for success. It's really for people who are ready to move past the basic productivity hacks, the time management tricks, the simple efficiency tips. It's for those who genuinely want to rethink how they achieve significant impact, who are willing to challenge their core assumptions about effort and reward. It's about embracing a paradigm shift, really internalizing that exponential growth comes from finding and exploiting these fundamental laws, not just trying to outwork everyone in a straight line. It's for the strategic mind that wants to build compounding advantage over time. Recognizing that real success isn't about spreading your effort evenly, but about laser focusing on the few things that matter most, and then letting those things amplify themselves through systems and cooperation. And for you, listening to this deep dive, often seeking knowledge quickly but thoroughly, looking for those aha moments, this isn't just abstract theory. This framework is a powerful mental model. It's designed to help you rethink productivity, scale with systems, and live smartly, and that applies everywhere. Personal growth, career moves, complex projects, creative work. Understanding these power laws can fundamentally shift your approach. It means you start looking for the highest leverage points in how you learn. What's the 1% of information that gives you 99% of the understanding you need? In your career, what's the 1% of your skills or relationships or strategic choices that yields 99% of your opportunities or influence? If you're doing creative work, what's the 1% of your output that really resonates with 99% of your audience? And how can you lean into that? It's a universal lens. It encourages you to seek out and capitalize on the disproportionate drivers of success, making your efforts way more potent and your results far more significant.
So yeah, this deep dive, the aim is to arm you with this new lens, a new way to look at problems and opportunities, equipping you with the intellectual tools to make smarter, more impactful choices. Not just at work, but everywhere you're trying to maximize results. It's about seeing that the landscape of success isn't flat, it's mountainous. It has these few towering peaks that offer incredible views and disproportionate rewards if you know how to find them and tap into their power. This framework is kind of like the compass for navigating that terrain.
Strengths and considerations. A balanced verdict.
Okay, let's talk straight to Koch's vision here. The book is called Bold, Scientific, and Thought-Provoking. And based on our chat, that seems pretty accurate, right? It definitely doesn't shy away from challenging the status quo, and it uses scientific principles, sometimes pretty complex ones, to back up its arguments.
Absolutely. And a major strength is how it manages to blend deep theory with real business examples. That's really key. Because concepts like power laws can feel very abstract, pulled from fields that seem miles away from your daily work. But Koch grounds them. He gives compelling examples from different industries, shows how these principles actually play out in the market, in product development, in strategy, even in how market leaders stay on top. This means that even if some parts feel very conceptual, require a real mental stretch, you can still see the tangible implications, how it might apply. It also significantly expands on the famous 80-20 mindset. It takes that simple, useful rule of thumb and elevates it into this deep philosophical and strategic approach. It moves from just observing imbalance to digging into the why it exists, giving you a much richer, more fundamental, and ultimately more actionable way to think about disproportionate returns. It's a whole system, not just a quick rule. A new operating system for finding and creating leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. That depth and clarity, it definitely makes sense why it gets such a strong rating. The review mentions 4.55, a brilliant next-level framework for success. That's a pretty hefty endorsement for a book aiming to change how you fundamentally operate. But, we should also touch on the potential downsides. Give a balanced view. No book works perfectly for everyone. The review does note some concepts can feel abstract, which seems fair given how widely it pulls from different disciplines, right?
Oh, for sure. That abstraction probably comes directly from its ambition, its interdisciplinary nature, the high-level thinking needed to grasp universal patterns. When you're drawing lines between biology, physics, maybe even quantum ideas, and trying to apply that to business strategy or personal effectiveness, that inherently requires a shift in thinking, moving from the purely practical to the deeply theoretical. It asks you to engage with foundational ideas that aren't always immediately obvious, to connect dots across pretty vast intellectual territories. So yeah, it's definitely not a light beach read you can just skim through. It demands focus, a willingness to really grapple with complex ideas and see how different fields might shed light on common truths.
And it also mentions it may not be as action-oriented for beginners. That feels like an important point, too. It's clearly not a step-by-step, do this, then do that kind of guide.
No, absolutely not. It's not a prescriptive manual full of checklists or immediate tactics. Not at all. It's much more a conceptual framework designed to empower strategic thinking. It gives you the lens, the understanding of the underlying principles, the right questions to ask, but it intentionally leaves it to you, the reader, to apply those principles to your specific situation. It doesn't just hand you the answers, it teaches you how to ask better questions and, crucially, where to look for those high-leverage answers in your own context. So yeah, it might not give instant tactical steps for someone just starting out or looking for a quick fix, but arguably, it offers something way more valuable long-term, a fundamental way of thinking that lets you identify, create, and exploit leverage points yourself rather than just following someone else's recipe. It teaches you how to fish for those big returns rather than just giving you a fish. And finally, the review says it requires focus to digest the scientific depth, which really just underlines that it's not casual reading, but it can be deeply rewarding if you put in the effort. It does get into the statistical and scientific background of power laws, things like long-tail distributions, positive feedback loops, which, yeah, can be challenging if you haven't encountered those ideas before. But hopefully, our deep dive here has helped distill some of that complexity, offered a bit of a shortcut to the core principles without needing to wade through all the scientific detail yourself. Our goal was really to give you the essential insights, those aha moments, make it a bit more accessible and maybe immediately useful for your own thinking.
So let's just quickly wrap up our deep dive into beyond the 80-20 principle, the core idea. It's clear and it's powerful. Success isn't random. It follows these deep universal laws. And if you understand them, you can potentially achieve wildly disproportionate results. We unpacked how effort and results are rarely equal. Often it's that radical 991 split, way beyond 80-20. We talked about how crucial it is to become a power law spotter, to actively look for your natural advantages. We explored that fascinating idea of building systems that evolve and improve themselves like in nature. And we finished by highlighting the immense power of cooperation as a force multiplier, unlocking exponential value together.
Right. This whole framework, it's not really about small tweaks. It's about fundamental shifts in how you see the world and pursue success. It aims to empower you to really rethink productivity, scale with systems, and live smartly by getting a grip on the deep structure of skewed outcomes. It offers a kind of blueprint for leveraging natural patterns to get outsized returns, moving you from just working harder to working strategically smarter and achieving disproportionately more. It's about designing your work, maybe even parts of your life, to benefit from these inherent accelerating forces, making your efforts compound instead of just adding up linearly.
Okay, so here's our final provocative thought for you to take away and maybe chew on. If it's true that a tiny fraction of input can genuinely create the vast majority of results, what is the one thing in your life or your work right now that if you optimized it, nurtured it, focused on it relentlessly, what's the one thing that could potentially create 99% of the value you're looking for? Is it a specific skill you have? A key relationship? A system you could automate? A particular audience you could serve better? A niche you could truly own? Just take a moment, sit with that question. Explore how understanding these deeper power laws might really change how you approach your next big project, or tackle your next challenge, or even just how you decide to spend your time tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you continue your own journey of discovery.